but there's one more part to actually ending fills. It's a lot of times you'll see people doing these super crazy fills or whatever, and they'll just end and abruptly they're back where they started. So maybe they'll do a simple groove. I mean, that's fine for the sake of contrast, because if you have the really simple groove and you have the crazy fill and you go back and forth, and depending on the situation, that might work. But I like to explore the concept. Remember I was saying I played saxophone before? So I learned a lot of this stuff, like, you know, more classical kind of approach with, you know, crescendos and diminuendos and staccato and all these fancy Italian words, right? It's Italian, right? I think, pretty sure. Yeah, but basically, there's one part of that which actually stuck with me and I still use a lot in drumming, which is this whole approach of crescendo and diminuendo. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's basically, crescendo is building up. Usually not only necessarily volume as in decibel points, but more intensity, like the way you're phrasing, the way you're building up. That's what you would call a crescendo, and a diminuendo would be the opposite, just tuning down. So I like to use that approach of diminuendos at the end of fills. Like, you don't have to end the fill super abruptly and then straight back to the groove. You can kind of scale down and let the fill kind of continue a little bit, but it's not as, the strokes you're playing are not as important as the fill was, right? It's just kind of taking you down. So I'll show you what I mean. Like, for example, if I play a fill and I end it like that on 2, for example. I'll usually do a little bit of the extra stuff, the little stack, the little hi-hat thing, just to kind of keep toning it down. Because if I do a crazy fill, like, that's an effect on its own, being that big contrast, but maybe it will make more sense to do a similar thing, but have a little crescendo at the end. And there I'm back in the groove again. So it's not so abrupt, it's more like, there I'm back. So I'm elongating the fill by kind of letting it die down by adding in some extra stuff and just kind of ease back into the groove. It doesn't have to be so drastic all the time. But again, moderation is key. If you do this every time, it's going to get very repetitive, it's going to get very boring. I actually, a lot in the past, I used to end fills on the 2 as well. So even if I would end the fill on 1, I would still throw in that little crash, like, I do that, like, every single time. And then someone pointed out that on Instagram. I was like, why do you always hit the crash on 2? It gets repetitive. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I just do it all the time. So sometimes you get caught off guard. So yeah, moderation is key. Try to balance these different ideas. Like, you'll do this and then you'll do that, and you'll kind of challenge the way you think. And like, do you have to play that way all the time? Do you have to do this? Do you have to do that? You have so many different options. This is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so many creative things you can get to when you're approaching things a bit more musically, and not just like, I like the paradiddle, I want to use this like that. You know, you can kind of see it from a bit more like, hey, this idea, this concept makes sense for trying to convey this and that. But that thing where I showed you before as well, with kind of scraping down a fill to its bare bones, just like, that's the main information in the fill. All the other stuff, that's just the meat on the bones. You don't have to have that to convey a fill idea. So sometimes when you're playing fills, less is more as well. You might not have to do all that crazy stuff. Just doing might be enough. You don't have to go crazy. So that's one part of all of this. In terms of that kind of stuff, orchestration and use